the discussions that came out of things that happened in Branson was what would happen if evil prevailed in this election. Let's say if they stole another election. And one thing that dawned on me, if the wrong side wins, it might actually be good for the Church of God and maybe for other churches, because often under pressure, churches grow and thrive. They claim that the oppression of Christians in Iran has made the Iranian church stronger. I mean, that's what people claim. I've heard people say the underground church in China, which many of them, even when the Chinese government a decade said, it's all right to be a Christian now, we made a deal with the Catholic Church, you can come out in the open. Many of the underground churches, we don't trust them. They stayed underground wisely, and many of them have some of the same doctrines we have from some of the immigrants, and they say they are very strong. Some will even go to 3 or 4 years in the re-education, isn't that a nice word, gulag camps, and come out even stronger. That under pressure, and I thought, well, and here's the question we posed. Is there any reason why God would allow, I'm not saying God does it, but he could stop it, would he allow the election to go the wrong way? Maybe because Americans, and I'm generalizing to not just the Church of God, but nominal Christians and Jews as well in general, believers in the Bible are not showing the kind of dedication that God wants. Like in the case of Israel, and I know it's a terrible thing for me to say, but here's how it appears. After October 7th, the Jewish people, because they were falling apart, internal squabbling and fighting, they became more united and more religious and more dedicated. Now we might argue about details about religion, but at least from their perspective, they moved closer to God and they're unified. They think it's like 70-30 behind their prime minister, and which I think surprised. I think the Hamas people thought, nah, they'll just air attack a little bit. They'll be like always, they'll back off under pressure. They seem to be determined. Now, because something bad happened. And here's a point that I want to make. I hope I say this accurately. It's better if you can be dedicated to God without having the pressure of the bad guys, their boot on your throat or their threats in the air. In other words, if you had kids and you said, I want you to learn how to behave, do your chores, whatever you want them to do, without the threat of the razor strap's going to come down on you at any second, and I'm watching everything you do. It'd be better if they could do it because they have the character to do it. It'd be better for us Americans if, the message you send to God is, we're going to do the right thing, not because we're under threat, everything's going to fall apart, we're going to starve, they're going to, whatever bad persecution you could think of, we're going to do the right thing because we love God and we want to do the right thing with the character. That's the best goal. And that's what God wants to see. But if he feels that nobody cares about the truth, I mean, when I say nobody, very few, and there's not much desire for God, he might allow evil to prevail, thinking that once they feel the pressure, they will come back to me. By the way, if you look at the Old Testament, I'm generalizing, but you can see it in Joshua especially. But if you go back and read the book of Judges, especially the first couple chapters, you'll see a pattern. They had Joshua, a good leader, and they stayed with God and did all the right thing, and they were prosperous. But after a generation of prosperity and Joshua and all the leaders who led with him passed away, they drifted into evil, idolatry, perversion, and we could probably details that we don't need to know. And God had to allow attacks from the outside to get them to cry out to God, we need you. Then he would send them a leader and they'd come back to God. But they couldn't stand prosperity too long or they would slide away. And there's even a verse in there, I'm not going to cover details, but where God said he would allow the Philistine nation to stay on their border for the obvious reason in case they drift too far away, he might need to let them hit them again. I mean, that's the way, when you read it, that's the impression you get. So, if God allows this election to be stolen, I'm going to give a why. One why could be, there may be many reasons, but he feels we have to suffer, I'm speaking of society in general, for people to come back to God, and maybe a lot more people will be joining the church. He wants believers, and including nominal Christians and Jews, to be more fervent in their service toward God and looking for the truth. Right now, few are really looking for the truth, I'm generalizing, or even care. I mean, that's the impression you would get. They read our material and other people's material, and who cares? They don't do anything. Now, it would be better to search for the truth and want to serve God even in prosperous times. I'm not going to read the verse, but I'm just going to mention it. Daniel 4:17, it all has to do with the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had, and the details you probably know of. But when Nebuchadnezzar learns a bitter lesson, that God is in charge, and he says sometimes God puts the basis of men, or if you want to look at it this way, he allows Satan to put the basis of men in power. I mean, you can't really deny that. Look at Hitler was just a bum in Vienna. Well, Stalin was just a minor thug in the Communist Party and evil guys. And anyway, the point is, but there are many others that you could probably go through history and say, that guy got great power. God allowed Nero, we could rattle off more, Caligula, you get the general idea. God will allow Satan sometimes to put evil people in power, the basis of men. So if we have religious freedom, and America still has the best religious freedom of any big, large nation in the world, we better appreciate it and try to keep it and say, God, I want to be dedicated to you, even though I don't have a boot on my neck right now. Because that may be one reason. People can't seem to survive good times and stay dedicated. One of the arguments that some historians made, I remember reading it, that if the Roaring Twenties had lasted all the way to 1941, that would not have been the greatest generation. It's weird to say this, but the Depression actually drew American families closer together. I could tell you a story about my grandparents, but you probably have heard similar stories. People got stronger, at least in some ways, not everyone, in some ways, and decadence went down and family unity went up during the Great Depression. And that great generation that won World War II and somewhat won the Korean War, and good times came to America, 25, 30 years later, the next generation just couldn't stand the good times and be disciplined, family-oriented, and God-oriented. Things started going down. And it's still that way. We can't handle good times and be godly. Do you know another reason something bad could happen? And I've heard this on several programs, so I believe it's true. 30 million nominal Christians do not vote. Let me say that again. 30 million nominal Christians do not vote. If 30 million Christians voted their values, it would make a tremendous difference in America. Think about it. You realize the anarchists, the communists, the socialists, the pro-criminal crowd, they vote. You know that, don't you? The ones who don't believe in family values, I can elaborate, they vote. But if 30 million Christians, we're purists and And politics is dirty. And so I want to talk about what a difference that 30 million voters could make. For instance, one particular party, they took out under God when they did the Pledge of Allegiance. And they actually booed God at one of their conventions. I heard it with my own ears. Now, they later kind of covered that up, and the press covered it up, but they really did. And, of course, I looked at some of the delegates. They were kind of weird-looking people with weird purple hair. And I could elaborate, but you get the idea. And I'm thinking, you're going to boo God? Now, they straightened it out so the major public didn't hear too much about it. But that shows you the attitude. One politician said, when a guy said, Jesus rules, she said, hey, you're in the wrong meeting. And, that probably wouldn't have happened 30 or 40 years ago. It probably wouldn't have happened 30, 40 years ago. And one party wants to pack the Supreme Court, so really, in effect, you won't have a Supreme Court. It'll just ratify whatever the establishment wants. And they want activist judges. That means they're not really judges, they're political activists in a judge's robe. And in 1 Samuel 8, all the way through chapter 16, where the people wanted a king, God told them, okay, I'll give you a king, and it won't, big central government will be bad for you. But he also told them, don't choose a king on superficial things like height, tall, dark, and handsome, on things like that. Or things like, they call it intersectionality, things like gender, race, sexual orientation, maybe a few other things. Don't choose your leaders based on those things. God said, choose your leaders based on the heart. And you can go to 1 Samuel 16:7. It actually says that specifically. And Samuel was told by God, because David's brothers were, at least 3 of them, were tall, dark, and handsome. I mean, really looked like the Saul type. This guy looks like a king. Whoa, a movie star, you might say, in today's world. And God said, no, I look on the heart. So good voters, as best you can, should look for the heart, and not on things that are what I call more Hollywood type, gender, race, sexual orientation. Because voting is not a Valentine's contest. By a Valentine contest, do you remember, at least in some schools, when you were little kids, you got to pass out Valentines to the other gender. You wonder, who's going to pick my name? And you're all embarrassed and worried about it. And of course, the beautiful people got more cards and the plain-looking ones got less. And anyway, you get some idea what I mean by Valentines. It was all based on superficial things. So let's look at reasons that Christians do not vote. And this is kind of a corny story, but the message they get from political candidates and parties can be misleading. Like this husband was dropping a hint to his wife about what he wanted. He said, I want something that's going to really, make me look good and will go from 0 to 200 in seconds. Well, guess what? She bought him a bathroom scale. Look good and go from 0 to 200 in seconds. He wanted a sports car. Well, we need to pick leaders, when you vote for them, based on things they believe in, things they say, as much as you can on their heart. You're going to say, well, what if neither candidate is good enough? Because that is a good logical argument. What if neither candidate is good enough? Well, it's not pure religion. It's not a religious sacrament, like who I vote for is a religious sacrament, like whatever you think of religious sacrament is, like on the New Covenant Passover. It's not that kind of thing. It's not that kind of thing. And because no other decision in normal life is based on things being pure and perfect, right? You know, when you buy a car, you buy a suit of clothes, you buy a stereo set, you buy a outdoor patio furniture. You probably get the best you can get under the circumstances and the price range you want. Nothing's perfect or pure. Or the salesman might have deceived you, but you'll eventually figure that out. Well, speaking of perfect and pure, this story is called Never Married. A friend asked a gentleman why he never married. He replied, well, I guess I just never met the right woman. I was always looking for the perfect girl. He said, come on now, you must have met the perfect girl at least once in your life. Actually, I did meet this girl, and she was perfect. Everything I wanted, everything. She was right. Well, why didn't you marry her? Well, the problem was she was looking for the perfect man. The point is, elections, you're looking for the best available candidate. Think about it. Really, I mean, obviously you can say you can go back to the primaries and try to improve it, and you can do that too. And that might be smart in voting as well. But still, you're looking for the best available candidate. You're not going to get Jesus Christ. He's not ruling until he comes back, and then he won't need your vote. He's going to take over and put people that he's going to put in charge, and so you don't have to worry about it. But you're not going to get Jesus Christ. It just is not going to happen. Christ will not be on the ballot. You got to pick the best available. Let me give you three possible examples. Three possible examples. You can have a really great leader like King Josiah. Great leader. I'm not saying he was perfect, but he was a good leader. And he's the one that they found the Bible and they had neglected it, and he fought hard. Though I don't think he totally could turn Judah back away from idolatry, but he fought hard to push the other way. And anyway, the prophet has told him the message from God is God liked what he was doing, even though he would not totally succeed. You could have a good leader. I call that leader A. You could have leader B, a bad, wicked leader, like Jezebel and Ahab. And I think Jezebel probably was the strongest and more devious of the two, but they were evil. I mean, the Northern Ten had a counterfeit religion. Yeah, this is the God that took us out of Egypt, counterfeit. But Jezebel was a priestess in the religion of one of the Baals, and that means Lord, but it's a pagan god, and they use like human sacrifice of babies and a lot of other temple prostitution, a lot of bad stuff, a lot of bad stuff. You can have a bad leader or a wicked leader. That could be your choice. Or a third leader, a flawed leader, but much better than the wicked one. And I'll give you an example, Jehu. He was a general, and the way it's written up, you assume God commissioned him because the prophet told him, you have been chosen to take over the throne from Ahab and Jezebel and destroy what they're doing. And of course, this general did it. But Jehu was flawed. He didn't take them all the way back to the true God in his purest form, unlike Josiah. But he did get rid of the worst evil, which probably helped them, and it fulfilled God's curses on Jezebel. And you probably know the rest of the story. But the point is, if you're voting choice between the bad candidate and a flawed candidate like Jehu, of course you pick the flawed candidate. At least he's going to push things in the right direction. Push things in the better direction. It's a no-brainer. If you go to 2 Kings 10, 18 and 19, but especially in verse 25, what happened was Jehu tricked the prophets of Baal, thinking, he said, I'm even more into Baal than Jezebel was. And let's all come to the temple of Baal. Everybody put on the vestments. Everybody know who are the priests. We're going to have a big sacrifice, and we're going to make Baal even more important. And he also added the threat. Any priest that doesn't show up, he's in big trouble. And they saw how Jehu got rid of Ahab and Jezebel's family. So they knew he wasn't playing. So they all showed up. Needless to say, he had them all killed, and they tore down the temple of Baal. That's 2 Kings 10:25. He ended false prophets in a big way. Well, that's a good thing, though he was not perfect, and he wasn't perfect. Nowadays, the more ungodly party is very brazen in the things that they're pushing. I mean, it's like out in the open. Out in the open. They're not trying to be subtle. It's out in the open. And if Christians don't vote against them, they might win. The one thing you can say about evil, and I'm assuming the devil is pushing it, but maybe human nature too. Evil is aggressive. It's going, it's pushing, it's driving. If it's not specifically stopped at the ballot box, and maybe in courtrooms and other places, if it's not stopped, it will grow like a fungus, or or bad things that get in the walls, like black mold. You know how black mold is? It grows. That's how evil, unless it's stopped. And they're sacrificing babies for convenience. And gender surgery, they call it, their semantic tyranny is good. They call it gender affirming care. No, it is mutilating teenagers' bodies. It's sterilizing teenagers. And Britain has learned that when they get a little older and they realize, wait a minute, I'm neither male nor female, I'm now sterile, their suicide rate goes up and they're sad about it. You mean when I was only 12, I got to make a horrible decision like that? And my parents? You realize that the governor of Minnesota actually passed a sanctuary gender surgery law in Minnesota. And here's how it works. If a child, I guess, goes to courts or school people, even if they come from out of state, go to any of those people and say, I want to change my gender, but my parents don't want me to do it. They have the courts there, and the law is set. They take the child away from the parents legally when the courts sign off on it. You now are a ward of the state, and the state, pays to have that child sliced and diced and mutilated, breast chopped off, and other things which I won't mention, but you get the general idea. That person, depending on how election go, will be one heartbeat away from the White House. And the fact that he was chosen, doesn't that tell you what they really think? That tells you what they really think. And it's like, and they push for weaker families. And they've been doing this for years. You can look at California started. They make divorce easier. And they push all kinds of anti-family policies that destroy families, and families get weaker. You can almost see it in the laws they pass. And actually, this happened right in little old Cape Girardeau, Missouri. I was shocked in the paper. Our library board apparently has a fair number of perverts on it. They're pushing for pornography in the library for little children to see regarding their sexuality. I'm not making this up. Cape Girardeau. You think, wait, this is not San Francisco. And they've been they've taken over the American Library Association. They really have. You ought to read about the new leader of that association. Evil needs to be stopped. It's pushing like black mold, taking over stuff. Evil will not stop by itself. It has to be resisted. One way you can resist it at the ballot box. If Christians say, I'm just going to spend my time spreading the gospel and praying, and maybe I'll homeschool my kids. I'll just be a good Christian. I won't worry about the society around me. Then you wake up one day and you realize, wait, they won't let me preach this, and that. And that's true in places like, I believe, Canada, Britain, and Australia. They limit what you can preach, even inside your own church. And they're forbidding homeschooling. All of a sudden you wake up one day, you mean it's illegal to do what I want to do? If they stay in power long enough. Now they may not be able to do this all at once. They'll do it little by little by little. But you see the direction they're going to bring society down much faster than a more moderate candidate would do. But you could wake up one day and whoa. And plus, some will say, well, I don't have any more kids in public school. What do I care if they screw up the public school? It does affect the society you live in. Think about it. If they get all the kids in public school mind all mixed up and screwed up and unpatriotic and they don't believe in morality, it will affect your society in ways that we probably have to elaborate, but you get the idea. Even if your kids are out of school, it will affect you. It may affect your grandkids in ways you haven't thought of. So if you don't vote, I guarantee you the people with the bad news secular anarchist, their voting percentage will keep going up or as high as they can get it. And you don't want the nominal Christian Jews who believe in the book, the Bible, their voting rate to go down, down. And I think they want to discourage people. It doesn't matter whether you vote or not. We're going to find a way to win. Don't let them discourage you. Keep trying. Now, obviously, and keep praying that God will block them, because God could still stop no matter how great their scheme is. And something people don't realize about the American government, the way it was set up by, Jefferson and Madison and all those guys you remember reading about in Washington, they said they mirrored it a little bit after the Roman Republic in its heyday. But they said, we want the least amount of government possible, but you still needed a government that could do things, like defend the borders and, and certain interstate trade, but the least amount of government. And for a good deal of American history, local towns and counties ran most things, and they didn't get that involved in people's lives. I guess it really started in World War I. Government got bigger and bigger anyway. But the point is, the kind of government that was set up is, it's government, as Lincoln said, of the people, for the people, and by the people. In other words, the people theoretically are in charge of the government. I know that's just theory, but supposedly, and maybe it was one of Jefferson's boys who said this, the government should fear the people more than the people fear the government. Does that make sense? Now, I know that's not going to be true, especially if the current people stay in power much longer. But in other words, that's where it's supposed to be. We, the voters, are Caesar, theoretically, and we should get to pick. But if you abdicate that responsibility, say, I'm going to sit home and do nothing, then you're stepping aside and letting bad influences have even more chance to do it. By the way, Paul used his Roman citizenship. I won't quote all the places, but if you go to Acts 22nd, I'll just mention, there are two, I'll just mention them real quickly. I think people in this audience are familiar with them, but this mob drags Paul out of the temple, and there's a big Roman fortress nearby, because the Romans believed actually in law and order, especially with trade, and they want orderly stuff. They don't like big mobs. So the Roman soldiers rush out of the fortress and take Paul away from the mob that's trying to kill him. And they actually have to put him on their shoulders and walk him up the steps of the fortress. And then Paul speaks to the commander in Greek to show the guy that, he kind of in on it. He can speak more than Hebrew or their dialect of Hebrew. He says, I'm a Roman citizen. The commander says, what? He says, I paid a lot for mine. How much you paid for yours? He says, no, I was born one. And his family, apparently Paul's family, was an impressive group that had money and connections. So he was a Roman citizen. And as a Roman citizen, they had to protect him. He said, well, can I address the crowd? And think of this picture. Paul using his Roman citizenship, and I'm saying we should use our American citizenship. But if a movie could do it right, there's probably a whole regiment of soldiers, with their swords and shields and lances at the foot of the fortress. Paul's in the top of the stairs, and he's speaking to the crowd in Hebrew. And all of a sudden they get quiet and listen to Paul, and he gives a great witness to the Jewish people, but he used his citizenship to do it. And later another mob jumps him, and they throw him in jail unfairly, and the people find out Paul's a Roman citizen. So they come quietly the next morning, would you please quietly leave town? We're sorry for what we did. But Paul said, nope. Tell them they have to come in here personally and apologize to me. And then he stays an extra day so we could strengthen the church, and then he leaves on his own. Paul used his Roman citizenship. And so at least, and actually in Romans 13, he actually tells the people not to rebel against the government, which in that case was Rome and the local governments in charge. And I recommend not rebelling against the government. I know people, I'm going to get a rifle and march on Washington. I don't recommend it. I think that's what they want people to do. You'll think about it. You'll see what I mean. I think the best thing you can do is pray about it, help the better candidates, and vote for the better candidate. And we'll see what God allows. And if God does allow the bad guys to take over, that means he wants America to have to suffer a little bit to become more godly. Then we should get more godly and tell God, well, we're going to learn to be more godly even without being under pressure, and then maybe God will relieve the pressure. But that's the best way to handle it. But be a responsible citizen. Like school boards. If you get a chance, if you do, to influence your school board, try to get a better school board. We're now finding out there's all kinds of crazy stuff like CRT they've been pushing into public schools. They're brainwashing kindergarten through third grade kids. I didn't even know what gender was when I was in the first grade. Really. I guess never mind. But you know what I'm saying? We could care less. Try to be good citizens. For instance, there are people who run blue cities like San Francisco. And they do things like decriminalize shoplifting, decriminalize illegal border crossings, decriminalize many drugs. What these cities turn into is chaos. Many of the major drugstores have to leave the city. Many left the whole state of California. I think it was 18 Walmarts left the San Francisco area. Just the shoplifting is too much. They have to put all kind of cages on even little things like razors and toothpaste. I'm not making this up. It's weird stuff. It's gone crazy. And there's open air drugs out in the open. School kids have to walk around drug needles and drug addicts. It's all out in the open in the daytime. This is San Francisco now. Crime runs rampant. Women aren't safe. It's a disaster. Would you want to put somebody who led one of those blue cities into disaster in charge of the whole nation? Think about that. And in John 8:12 and 9:5, God said we should be the light of the world. Now, I want to mention this scripture at the end, but I want to mention it now. I'm going to bring it up at the end. In Matthew 5:13, and the Sermon on the Mount, where Christ really gets serious with the law. Christ is getting serious with the law. He says, we, Christians, are both the light of the world and the salt of the world. And what does the salt do? It makes society taste better, and it's a preservative. And what does a preservative do, especially in those days when they didn't have refrigerator? You could salt down meat, and it wouldn't decay for a long time. You could, you've heard of, anyway, cowboys use some of that meat, jerky, salted meat, when they're on the trail, so they could have meat without refrigeration. Well, that's what the salt does. You slow down the decay of society. And the lesser of two evils is still the lesser of two evils. Believe me. Or would you rather have the greater of the two evils? I think lesser of two evils is lesser. We want to slow down the decline and help families as much as possible. And if we can learn to be godly without pressure, persecution, or poverty, that's best for our character. And we should pray that God give us a better, more prosperous government, and we'll do our best to try to be good Christians without having a jackboot on our neck or threats against us. And I hope we don't lose. I hope we don't. I hope that the better of the two candidates win. And remember, in an election, you're not voting for Christ. You're voting for the best available candidate. That's all you have, the best available. And wasting your vote on a third party because you think they're pure. One, no third party is all that good anyway, but why waste your vote? Like people wasted votes on Ross Perot. But you know that's why it's in there, just to get the more liberal candidate elected. And he picks judges and administrators who are going to be around for years to push ungodly things. Don't waste it. And by the way, what about separation of church and state? It's misunderstood. When Jefferson wrote the letter, he was protecting the Baptist church from the government. And all that amendment said was that Congress could make no amendment regarding a church. In other words, because most of the people were Protestants that formed the American government, there were a few others, but mostly Protestants at the time, they didn't want any particular denomination to become the official government denomination, like in England, because they had learned from and other European countries as well, all the problems they had with the Church of England, and we'll go into all that. They just said, and they had chaplains from different churches who would come in and speak to Congress and do the opening prayer. They just didn't want an official denomination. They weren't protecting the government from the righteousness of the Bible. Actually, Jefferson used the Bible as a textbook when he became president. That's an actual fact. So the idea, and I actually think some of the lawyers who started pushing this after World War II probably knew the truth. They just didn't care. We'll fool the government. Say, we got to keep all goodness. Like one senator from California said about a judge, he says, oh, we can't have you on the bench. The dogma of Christianity lives inside you. That was their attitude. We don't want anybody who has any righteous biblical standards on the bench. We want activists, secular, no God judges. Oh, that's really what America needs. We need more no God judges. And salt is a preservative. It really is. So when you're voting, ask yourself about policies. Which policies will slow down the rate of decay? By the way, people argue about borders. If you go to Acts 17:26, God said that he put various nations in different places and set their boundaries. God is not against borders. And legal immigrants usually are more patriotic and really help America. And this is an estimate, but the numbers came from the CDC. A little less than 500,000 of the 10 to 20 million illegal aliens, nobody's quite sure, that have gotten in America in the last 4 years, are criminals. They have criminal records. Now, they don't find this out till later. They don't tell them that. And think about that. So the number is probably 500,000 criminals. Not that we don't have enough criminals. We have a shortage of criminals. We need more. And many of these people are from some of the most vicious gangs. You think the teenagers in your neighborhood are bad? You ought to read about some of these gangs. I mean, they're really vicious. They prefer knives to guns because they want people to suffer. MS-13, for instance. But we should love all immigrants because, God said love the immigrants and others and widows and all that sort of thing. But that doesn't mean you can't guard your borders. And so we want to slow down the decay. Now I'm going to read two verses. You might want to turn to these verses. I'm going to read it as we come to a conclusion of this message. I'm going to read two scriptures. Proverbs 8:36. Proverbs 8:36. Proverbs 8:36 reads, "But he who sins against me wrongs his own soul. All those who hate me love death." The people who hate God love death. Well, ask yourself, which is the party of death? You know, during a certain party's convention, they had portable abortion clinic trucks out in front of the convention, like taco trucks. Yeah, you can you can kill your unwanted baby like somebody asking for another taco. Really, like taco trucks. Let's vote to kill babies like tacos. And they literally had them several parked out in front, and they were giving away free abortions like tacos. And making light of the abortion pill, which apparently is more dangerous than you think and more painful than people think. And then the second pill has a woman kick out the baby. They could be sitting on the toilet and a baby slides out of them. And they say it can be very traumatic. It wasn't as simple as you thought. And they had people dancing like the pill is so much fun. You know, like dancing. And you'll actually see some TV commercials about diseases. They're all dancing and having fun. Well, it really isn't fun. It's death. And which party pushes getting rid of the elderly or people that have mental illness? You can just give them some pills and let them slip off. I could elaborate, but you get the idea. You don't want to vote for the party that loves death. And I even believe there's some people in some of these parties, they think there are too many people on planet Earth. They don't mind if a whole bunch die. I don't know if that's true, but I know many of their policies, euthanasia, abortion, are death policies. You don't want to vote for people like that. Now, my last scripture is Matthew 5:13. I know we said it, but I want to emphasize it in a way that hopefully will have an impact. Matthew 5:13. "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses flavor, how shall it be seasoned?" In other words, as good Christians, they should notice us, as much as you can at least, that you're trying to be a good influence. Because salt makes things taste better. It's like, I've eaten some foods that have no flavor. They're so bland, it's like, oh. I guess you can eat it, but there's nothing there. No salt, it's just all bland. I guess I love salt too much, but I love potato chips and pretzels. Not that it's good for me, so I'm not asking you all to eat it. But you get my point. What does salt do? It slows down the decay of the meat. Well, as voters, and we start voting for the better of the two choices, we can slow down the decline of America. Let's assuming that our prophecy understandings are correct, and the world will eventually go down, and the beast will come, and evil will come. We can at least slow down that decline by voting for the better of the two candidates. Just like meat, you can preserve more family values. And maybe we can try to watch less bad things on TV in the movie theater. That might help a little bit, watch more quality stuff. That might help a little bit at least. Anyway, I'll read it again. "But if salt loses flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden." I remember a particular presidential candidate said, "We're the shining city on the hill, the light." Salt slows down decay. We cannot save the world, but we can slow down the decay of our society. And America may be the last best bastion of free religion, reasonable family standards, and about that sanctuary state for kids who want to change their gender. It may be 12 to 14 states now, But if the wrong people have too much time and power, it could be 50 states, including where you live. Oh, no, it'll never come to where we live. And you think that. But I see stuff that started in California popping up all over. So the 30 million nominal Christians should not abdicate their responsibility, but vote for the lesser of two candidates.